What do we see here, Mr. B? Tell me what you see.
A conversion of a roof of a garage to a exterior deck. And then the worst thing they could possibly do is put all those pots and plants on top, which are just more sponges that you're putting on the roof to cause the dry rot. And then it looks like on top of that, they're putting plants on top of the guardrail, which is adding weight and dry rot. So yeah, you can do not just about anything more wrong than that.
Now, there are a couple of issues I wanted to address here. One is the use of the roof for green. Now, we have a lot of green roof interest in San Francisco. In order to have a green roof, you have to do two things. You have to address the structural issue that all of this greenery and the water that it holds is very heavy. And secondly, you have to provide exceptional waterproofing. Basically, you put a complete waterproof membrane underneath everything, and then you can begin to develop your green roof strategy, where you simply start putting plants on top. It's a recipe for leaks. Another thing that's a real serious problem with this deck on top of the garage is that the guard seems to be made of 1x material. And they're just like garden fence pickets. And I think that they don't meet what I would consider to be
none of that's legal.
Minimum standards for safety. Here's our temporary repair. Someone is going up and down this stairway, and it's just shaking a little bit too much for them, so they put in some diagonal bracing. Not a bad idea to keep it from shaking.
Yeah, and then I like using the redwood lattice, although they painted over it, to prevent kids from falling through the handrails.
That is actually a very good idea. This is a steel frame holding up the deck.
That's not supposed to be there, though, because that's a street, and you're not supposed to have posts coming down onto a sidewalk. So if somebody had to fix that deck because it was shaking too much with those posts.
So this may have previously been a cantilevered deck above the sidewalk, and they put posts underneath it, steel posts.
And you can extend a deck over a public right-of-way like a sidewalk, but you have a minimum height you have to accomplish so that the sidewalk can be used for pedestrians. That would be a violation of disabled access because a blind person would run into that post and knock themselves out.
What is the minimum height over a sidewalk? Does anybody recall? Is it 10 feet? 10 feet. Okay, here's a close-up of that metal deck. So even metal needs lots of maintenance. Guards and guardrails.
Yeah.
Now, all of these decks are required to have guards or guardrails, and the spacing, as I mentioned before, is a 4-inch maximum. Sphere cannot pass through. And here we are looking at some cables which are tense. So these cables are 4 inches apart, but they can be easily moved, so they're more than 4 inches. So this does not meet the standard of a 4-inch sphere cannot pass through. It can easily pass through.
Guaranteed
here.
Some kid's going to want to see if they could stick their head through that by prying the cables apart and then getting their head stuck.
So if you were to make a cable guardrail like this, you should put them closer together, 3 inches apart or something like that. In San Francisco, it's important for many people to have an unobstructed view through the guardrail. And we see often glass rails or cable rails. And so
Laminated tempered glass is kind of a common way to solve the falling hazard without having an obstruction.
One
other thing that I see all the time, and I've got a grandson that's just over a year old. You have that 4-inch spacing, and you got an ambitious young boy, makes a pretty good ladder for him.
Horizontal spacing.
The horizontal, exactly. You know, so the vertical rails, as far as child safety, I think is the best way to go. You know, this, even if it meets code, sometimes it's a little scary. You got to think a little bit beyond that sometimes.
Attractive nuisance for the child is going to go, I really want to climb over this.
So the building code is silent about whether this should be vertical or horizontal. And horizontal guardrails are fine, even though we all understand they pose some kind of hazard for little kids to climb. This is an interesting building up behind Hoover Middle School in the Sunset.
Looked like it was in the Sierras.
Isn't that something? The back of this building looks just like a normal blind wall building with a big clear span wall of, you know, stucco or something. And here, what it appears to be, and I don't know what the actual structure is, it appears to be stone below and a log building above with a big balcony deck on these giant beams that project from the building.
And I'll bet you dollars to donuts those are faux beams.
Yeah,
And the real structure is hidden somewhere inside.
I would not be surprised.
And for that quality of construction, they probably have pretty good flashing details.
Yeah. Tremendous problems with water intrusion when you have that many horizontal members, because the water is going to want to get into each and every one of those cracks between the horizontal boards of this log building. We have a variety of different kinds of balconies and decks here, all of which have extreme waterproofing issues. The very, very modern one on the right requires a very highly sophisticated flashing and waterproofing detail.
I would say the one in the middle, and I know that building. I don't know if that particular building has been inspected, but I've done a lot of those buildings that have these concrete balconies with the precast concrete balustrade, and the corrosion that you see in those, the structural steel corrosion you see in those. I've worked on one on, I think, Gulf Street. We had to shore it up the afternoon we opened it up. We realized we had about 10,000 pounds of concrete over our head with no visible means of support because the steel had totally rusted out. So when you have big ones like that, you really want to pay attention to those because they are massively heavy.
And on the left, the same kind of thing where we have a concrete rail, probably precast pieces fit together with steel reinforcement that well could be rusted, who knows.